The jumbo Sherman the Germans couldn't kill. Even 88 mm shells bounced off like toys. The morning of October 29th, 1944 began with a cold wind moving through the assembly area east of Aachen. The ground was soft from days of rain, and mud clung to boots, tank treads, and crates of ammunition stacked beside supply trucks. The line of armored vehicles waiting for final checks stretched along a narrow road bordered by damaged trees stripped bare by artillery fire. Mechanics tightened bolts and checked fuel lines while officers studied maps under the weak gray light. Engines coughed alive one by one, filling the air with exhaust. In the center of this scene stood a tank that looked noticeably different from the others. Its hull plates were thicker, the turret heavier, and the edges showed signs of improvised welding done in Detroit only a few months earlier. This was an M4A3E2 Jumbo Sherman, one of the few in Europe. Its commander, Staff Sergeant Daniel Rourke, climbed down from the turret and adjusted the strap of his helmet as he inspected the glassy plate with a focused expression. Rourke was 26, raised on a farm in Kansas, and had enlisted in 1942. He had fought through Normandy and the push beyond St. Lo, and he had seen standard Shermans burn after single hits from German guns. When the battalion assigned him to the Jumbo, he understood why. His experience, calm under pressure, and ability to keep his crew organized made him a reliable choice. Around the tank, his crew prepared for the day's assault. Corporal Leon Marsh, the gunner, was securing the elevation controls. Marsh was from Minnesota, formerly a hunting guide, and his precision made him one of the battalion's best shots. Private First Class Henry Kovacs, the loader, sorted shells into ready racks. He had worked in a Pittsburgh steel mill before the war, giving him a familiarity with heavy machinery and metal stress that often let him detect small issues before they became failures. Private Joe Hanley, the driver, was the youngest on the crew, just 20. He had joined as a replacement after the unit took losses in Normandy. His driving was steady, cautious, and exact, traits the officers valued for navigating narrow town streets under fire. The final crew member, Private Eddie Palmer, operated the bow machine gun and the radio. Before the war, he worked in a repair shop, and he handled the tank's communications with a calm that steadied the rest of the crew. They were assembled here for a single purpose: to break into the fortified towns forming part of the German West Wall, a line of defenses strengthened with bunkers, steel-reinforced buildings, anti-tank positions, and interlocking fields of fire. The attack into Stahlberg will be led by Rourke's tank. Because of its increased armor, almost double that of a standard Sherman, the Jumbo was expected to withstand fire that would instantly kill other vehicles. The infantry from the 9th Division would follow behind it, using it as cover as they moved into the streets. As artillery in the distance shook the ground, the battalion operations officer walked toward the tanks, carrying a map board. Tank commanders gathered around him as he placed the map over a crate. He pointed to the narrow road leading into Stahlberg and explained the situation. German forces were expected to defend from concealed positions within factories, residential buildings, and fortified cellars. Anti-tank guns, especially high-velocity 75mm and 88mm weapons, were likely positioned inside collapsed structures or behind rubble piles. The previous assaults had stalled due to heavy fire, and infantry casualties had risen sharply. Today, the armor battalion would attempt to force a breakthrough. When the officer indicated Rourke's tank with his pencil, his tone became more direct. The lead tank must not stop unless the road is blocked. The Jumbo goes first because it can take the hits the others can't. Your job is to draw fire and destroy anything locking down the infantry. Clearing the first 2 streets is essential. If you stop, the entire attack stops. The commanders nodded, but the weight of the task was clear. Rourke returned to his tank without speaking. Inside the turret, he checked the radio headset while Palmer powered up the set, adjusting frequencies. Marsh ran a finger over the sight lens to remove dust. Kovacs lifted a 75mm high-explosive shell and slid it into the ready rack, tapping it twice, as he always did. Hanley sat in the driver's position and adjusted his pedals. The engine idled with a deep vibration that traveled through the hull. Outside, the infantry took their positions. Some leaned against the rear of the jumbo for brief shelter from the cold. Others wiped moisture from their rifle receivers. They knew that once the tank rolled forward, they would follow closely behind it, crossing open ground and entering narrow streets where visibility was limited and enemy fire could come from any upper floor. Rourke lowered his head into the turret, leaving the hatch half open so he could observe the approach. He looked at each crew member through the dim turret light. No one spoke, but the tension was clear. They all understood why they were chosen. The jumbo had the armor to survive what the standard Shermans could not. Their task was to absorb the initial shock, machine gun bursts, anti-tank rounds, and whatever else the Germans had prepared. Over the radio, the battalion commander's voice came through with a slight crackle. Lead tank, prepare to advance. Rourke placed one hand on the turret ring and steadied himself. Driver, forward gear. Stay centered on the road. We don't slow down unless we're blocked. Hanley acknowledged quietly and shifted the transmission. The tank began moving, its tracks grinding through the mud. Infantry rose from cover and fell in behind it. The sound of the engine echoed off the ruined buildings ahead, and the road leading into Stahlberg appeared as a dark corridor between shattered walls. The assault had officially begun, and the jumbo moved first, exactly as it had been built to do. The jumbo rolled into the approach road, leading toward Stahlberg with its engine pushing steadily against the weight of the added armor. The infantry followed in a loose line, careful to stay within the narrow pocket of safety created by the tank's mass. The closer they moved toward the town, the louder the echoes of distant gunfire became. Short bursts of automatic fire ricocheted in the distance, and a sharp whistle of outgoing American artillery passed overhead before landing somewhere deeper inside the urban sprawl. At the front of the tank, Hanley concentrated on keeping the jumbo centered on the road. Broken pavement and small craters threatened to jar the vehicle off course. Rourke watched the buildings ahead through the half-open hatch. The structures grew taller, many missing roofs or entire floors, leaving jagged edges exposed. Smoke drifted through empty windows. It was the kind of environment where German anti-tank gunners prefer to hide. Inside the turret, Marsh adjusted his sight and waited for the first sign of movement. The gunner's posture rarely changed. He sat perfectly still, one hand on the elevation wheel, the other near the firing trigger. Kovacs kept a shell ready on his lap, his eyes fixed on the breech, counting his breath in slow, steady intervals. Palmer monitored the radio, scanning for updates from the infantry or the battalion commander. The column advanced another 50 yards before the first indication of danger appeared. A sudden shout came from the infantry on the left side of the road. Rourke immediately lowered himself deeper into the hatch. Ahead, a window partially covered by collapsed beam shifted. Marsh reacted before any order was given. Possible gun position, second floor, right side, he announced in a low, controlled voice. Rourke confirmed the movement. Traverse right. Load heat. Kovacs slid the high-explosive shell into the breech and locked it. Up. Marsh took aim. On target. Fire. The 75mm round left the barrel with a force that shook the entire turret. The shell struck the window and removed the entire section of wall in a cloud of debris. Pieces of metal and shattered wood scattered across the street. Infantry advanced to clear the building, signaling that the threat had been neutralized. But even as they moved, a deeper and unmistakable sound cut through the town. A heavy, concussive blast, sharper and louder than anything they had heard yet. Marsh instinctively flinched, and Rourke gripped the turret ring tightly. That was an 88, Marsh said quietly. Before Rourke could respond, the second blast came. A bright flash cut through the haze, followed by the high-velocity impact of the shell hitting the jumbo's thick, glassy plate. The tank rocked as if shoved by a massive weight. The interior lights flickered, and a shower of dust fell from the roof plates. Inside, Kovacs froze in place, gripping the next shell. Hanley's foot hovered momentarily over the pedal before he caught himself and regained control. Marsh steadied the sight. Palmer pressed his back against the radio equipment, waiting to hear if any systems had failed. Rourke exhaled sharply. "Driver, keep us moving. Do not stop." "Moving," Hanley replied, pushing the tank forward with a deliberate surge. A second 88mm round struck the turret cheek. The noise inside the tank was deafening, metal against metal, a violent clash that rang through the interior. But once again, the armor held. Kovacs checked the area above the breach for spalling, but only small flakes of paint had fallen. Marsh scanned the street ahead. "I've got nothing. Must be inside a building." Rourke studied the angles. "Factory block on the right. Look for an opening low to the ground." Infantry darted behind rubble piles, shouting positions as they searched for the muzzle flash. After a moment, one soldier pointed toward a collapsed loading dock where a rectangular gap sat just above ground level. "That's it," Rourke said. "Traverse right. Lower your barrel." Kovacs, he ready. The tank rotated its turret slowly, the heavy mechanism groaning under the strain. Marsh lowered the gun until the barrel aligned with the shadowed gap. He waited, watching for the slightest movement inside the darkness. Then the third 88mm flash erupted. The shell missed the glacis by inches, striking the left track guard. Shrapnel clattered across the hull, and a section of the fender tore away. Hanley gripped the controls to steady the tank. "On the way," Marsh said, firing the shell directly into the opening. The explosion inside the building was immediate and powerful. Dust billowed out in waves, followed by scattered debris. The echo of collapsing equipment came from within. Infantry rushed forward to secure the position. After a few seconds, they signaled that the gun crew had been neutralized. Inside the jumbo, the crew let the sound of the engine fill the silence. Kovacs rested the next shell against his knee, still absorbing what had happened. Marsh loosened his grip on the firing lever. Palmer adjusted the radio dial, listening for orders. Hanley kept both hands on the driver's controls, unwilling to relax even for a moment. Rourke looked around the turret, then spoke in a steady tone. "These rounds will keep coming. The armor held today, but we don't rely on luck. We rely on staying ahead of their sight lines. We move fast, we hit first, and we don't make ourselves an easy target." The men acknowledged quietly. Outside, the infantry formed up again, ready to continue the push. The tank moved forward, its dents still warm, its crew fully aware that this assault was only beginning. The deeper the column moved into Stahlberg, the narrower the streets became. Buildings leaned inward from years of shelling. Their upper floors collapsed onto lower ones, leaving hanging beams and open rooms exposed to the cold air. Every corner looked capable of hiding a gun crew. The infantry stayed close to the jumbo, moving in coordinated bursts from doorway to doorway, keeping the tank within their line of sight. The sound of distant German small arms fire ricocheted between the walls, producing an uneven rhythm that made it difficult to determine how many defenders lay ahead. Inside the tank, Marsh kept his sight trained forward, scanning continuously for subtle movements. Hanley maintained a slow but steady speed, accelerating only when Rourke ordered it. Kovacs positioned shell crates within easy reach. Palmer monitored the battalion net, listening to updates as other platoons reported contact on nearby streets. None of them were engaging 88mm guns, which meant Rourke's route had drawn the heaviest resistance. The next intersection approached with a sharp turn to the right. Broken vehicles, pieces of masonry, and two abandoned carts blocked most of the open space, forcing Hanley to angle the jumbo carefully around the debris. Rourke kept one hand on the hatch rim, the other bracing himself as he scanned the high windows and intact chimneys on both sides. The quiet that followed felt unnatural, as if the town were waiting for the tank to expose its flank. A shout from the infantry snapped the tension. On the far end of the intersection, a small flicker of reflected light appeared in the doorway of a large stone building, just enough for Marsh to catch it. "Possible armor or gun sight," Marsh called out. Rourke lowered himself immediately. "Traverse right. Kovacs, load AP. We need to be ready for anything." Kovacs slid the armor-piercing shell into the breech, locked it, and stepped back with his hands against the turret wall. Up. The turret rotated with a slow, heavy grind as Marsh searched the doorway for clearer movement. Before he found a solid target, An explosion hit the street to their left. Dust and bricks burst outward, clouding the air. Panzerfaust, Palmer muttered, recognizing the hollow blast. Infantry scattered for cover, returning fire toward the building. Rourke focused on the doorway ahead, expecting a second attack. A moment later, the familiar, sharp muzzle flash of an anti-tank gun erupted from within. The round smashed into the jumbo's front slope armor, bending one of the welded-on plates but not penetrating. The crew felt the violent impact. The tank shook, metal clanged, and loose equipment rattled inside the hull. Kovacs instinctively covered his head before realizing everything was still intact. Marsh steadied the gun and exhaled through his nose. "Fire," Rourke ordered. Marsh fired the AP round. It tore into the doorway, producing a clear metallic crack, followed by a deeper internal blast. The infantry advanced, confirming that the gun, a concealed 75 millimeters, had been disabled. Even with the threat eliminated, Rourke could feel the weight of the situation growing heavier. Every street demanded a new calculation. Every window and doorway felt like a shooting position waiting to open. He dropped back into the turret and looked at his crew. "Stay sharp. They're trying to slow us down. They'll use every weapon they've got before we reach the center." The tank resumed its advance. Marsh returned to scanning. Kovacs prepared another shell. Palmer relayed the infantry's reports. Hanley maneuvered carefully around debris, avoiding exposed basements and collapsed drain covers that could trap the tracks. 2 blocks deeper into the town, an abandoned factory loomed on the right side. Its windows were shattered, and steel beams protruded from the roof like broken ribs. The road ahead narrowed sharply, forcing the tank to pass within a few feet of the building's outer wall. Infantry fanned out to cover the exposed side. As the jumbo approached the narrow stretch, a voice came through the radio. Another platoon warning that German armor had been spotted moving between the factory complexes. The transmission ended abruptly with static. Rourke looked through the partially open hatch, scanning the gaps between the structures. Marsh suddenly shifted his sight. Movement inside the factory. Lower level. Rourke ordered. "Clear the opening." Kovacs loaded fast. Marsh fired as soon as the reticle aligned. The shell exploded inside the factory, sending dust and fragments spilling from the windows. Infantry advanced toward the breach, signaling that the interior was momentarily clear. Hanley drove the jumbo past the factory wall when the unmistakable echo of heavy tracks reached them. It came from the alleyway ahead, slow, deliberate, metallic. Marsh adjusted his aim. Infantry took cover, pointing toward the intersection. Then a large shadow was shifted behind the corner, followed by the angular outline of a tank turret. "Panzer IV," Marsh said quietly. Rourke assessed the angle. The German tank was trying to swing its gun into position, but debris blocked part of its turn radius. The jumbo had the advantage by a narrow margin. "On that turret ring," Rourke said. "EP." Kovacs slammed another round into the breach. Marsh refined his aim, accounting for the German tank's movement. "On target. Fire." The AP round struck the Panzer IV's turret ring. The German tank jolted and stopped rotating. Infantry poured rifle and bazooka fire at its exposed flank while Marsh fired a second shell. This time the round penetrated through the side plate. Smoke began filling the alleyway. After a short moment, the crew abandoned the tank, fleeing deeper into the ruins. The infantry secured the area, reporting that the enemy vehicle was fully disabled. The jumbo sat motionless for a few moments as the dust settled. Inside, the crew absorbed the intensity of the engagement. Kovacs leaned against the loader's seat for stability. Marsh rolled his shoulders once to release the tension. Hanley rested his hands on the controls, waiting for the next command. Rourke looked toward the center of the town, where smoke rose across the skyline. They had broken through the initial defensive ring, but the heaviest resistance was still ahead. "Let's keep moving," he said calmly. "This isn't over." The tank advanced into the deeper streets of Stahlberg, its armor dented and scraped, its crew fully aware that the most dangerous part of the assault had yet to begin. The closer the jumbo pushed toward Stahlberg's industrial district, the more chaotic the environment became. The streets were clogged with the remnants of factory wagons, collapsed pipes, broken machinery, and fragments of bricks scattered by weeks of shelling. Smoke drifted through the alleys in heavy layers, making it difficult to distinguish intact walls from destroyed ones. Every sound echoed, loose metal shifting under the tank's tracks, distant bursts of rifle fire, and the steady hum of the engine working against the added weight of the armor. The infantry reorganized behind the tank, forming two staggered lines that advanced on either side of the road. They moved cautiously between doorways and rubble piles, signaling to each other with shorthand gestures. These men depended on the jumbo to absorb the first hits, and the responsibility sat heavily on the crew inside. Rourke stayed low in the hatch, scanning ahead while keeping enough of his body outside to watch for movement on the upper floors of the buildings. Hanley gripped the controls with both hands, keeping the tank steady despite the uneven ground. As the column advanced another 100 yards, the static on Palmer's radio shifted into a broken transmission from a nearby platoon. The message was unclear, something about heavy fire near the rail line and multiple anti-tank guns operating in coordinated positions. The signal faded in mid-sentence. Rourke told Palmer to keep trying, but interference made communication unreliable. The road curved slightly to the left, leading toward a cluster of factories that the Germans had reinforced during the early months of the war. Tall smokestacks towered over the area, many cracked or partially collapsed. Long shadows filled the narrow spaces between the buildings, creating blind spots that forced Rourke and Marsh to divide their attention between too many angles at once. Marsh spoke quietly. "Sight lines are bad here. They could set up anywhere." Rourke acknowledged without looking away from the front. "Stay centered. We keep our armor forward." Hanley slowed the tank to navigate around a series of large steel drums that had spilled across the road. Some had ruptured, leaking dark stains onto the ground. The infantry paused, waiting for the tank to clear the obstacle before they followed. As the jumbo passed the last drum, the sound of a heavy gunshot erupted from the right. The impact hit the forward turret face with a strong metallic thud. The tank shook, and a fine cloud of dust filled the interior. Marsh lifted his head slightly from the sight, then immediately lowered it again. "That was another high-velocity round," he said. "Angle came from inside the factory complex." Rourke pulled down the hatch to a narrower opening. "Hanley, move us forward 10 yards, angle the hull front right. Marsh, look for a flash inside those large windows." The jumbo advanced while Marsh adjusted the turret. The large factory on the right side had broken windows spanning its length, creating multiple points where a gun could be positioned. The infantry immediately spread out, taking cover behind rows of broken concrete barriers. A second shot came, louder than the first. It struck the thick mantlet around the main gun. This time the impact shook the entire turret, pushing Marsh back slightly from the controls. Palmer checked the radio equipment instinctively to ensure nothing had been damaged. Kovacs steadied himself with one hand on the ready rack. Marsh wiped dust from the edge of his sight. "I saw the flash that time. Lower level, right corner, behind a beam." Kovacs stood ready with another shell. "What do you need?" "He for now," Marsh said. "If they're behind machinery, it'll move them." Rourke nodded. "Load he. Clear that corner." Kovacs shoved the round into the breech, locked it, and stepped back. Marsh focused on the exact point he had seen the muzzle flash. Dust and smoke made the view unclear, but he held the reticle steady. "On the way," he said. The He round detonated inside the factory, sending a burst of dust and debris through the lower windows. The infantry advanced several meters, waiting for a counterattack. Nothing came immediately. Hanley kept the tank still while Rourke monitored the windows. The air was filled with floating brick particles and powdered cement, drifting slowly from the hole created by the explosion. Marsh adjusted his sight again, searching for movement. Before Marsh could confirm the status of the gun crew, a burst of machine gun fire erupted from the left side of the street. Infantry scattered behind cover. Rourke rotated his body and pointed toward a second building, a long structure with boarded windows and a partially collapsed roof. "Marsh, left side, mid-level window," Rourke said. "I see it. Fire." Marsh's round struck the window directly, collapsing part of the outer wall. The machine gun fire stopped immediately. Infantry moved up to clear the position, signaling that the threat had been neutralized. As the dust settled, the distant rumble of German engines echoed from somewhere beyond the factories. The sound indicated multiple vehicles, but the echoes made it difficult to determine their direction. Marsh lifted his eye from the sight, listening. "That's armor," he said. Rourke surveyed the industrial complex. "They may try to flank through the side alleys. We hold position until the infantry secures the next block." Palmer's radio crackled again. This time a clear voice came through. "Enemy armor moving near the rail line. At least 2 vehicles, possibly more, stay alert." The signal cut off. Rourke tightened his grip on the hatch rim. "We keep our front armor toward the largest threat. Nobody panics." Inside the tank, tension settled over the crew in a steady, silent pressure. They understood the significance of what was coming. The German defenders had resisted fiercely so far, and the industrial sector offered them the best cover they could hope for. The jumbo rolled forward another few meters, its tracks grinding over steel fragments. The infantry formed up again, preparing to push deeper. The area grew quiet, too quiet for a town under siege. Marsh maintained a rigid posture at the site. Hanley waited with his foot resting firmly on the clutch. Kovacs held a shell in both hands, ready to load in an instant. Palmer adjusted the radio dial, lowering the volume to catch faint transmissions. Rourke looked ahead at the maze of factories and narrow alleys. They had entered the heart of Stahlberg's defenses, and every movement now carried the risk of triggering another concealed gun or armored counterattack. The crew understood that any hesitation could cost lives, not only their own, but also the infantry depending on them. The tank moved forward again, fully committed to clearing the industrial district, knowing the next engagement could be the most decisive of the day. The deeper the jumbo moved into the industrial district, the heavier the air became. Dust hung in thick layers, stirred by each engine vibration and drifting slowly back into place after the tank passed. Most of the buildings ahead were partially collapsed, their steel frames warped from artillery fire. The narrow alleys between them formed a series of dead zones where visibility was limited and the threat of concealed anti-tank guns increased with every meter. Rourke kept his hatch cracked open just enough to observe the road ahead. Infantry moved cautiously on both sides, advancing in short, controlled bursts. Each step was deliberate. Every man understood that they were now within the zone where German defenders had prepared their strongest points. The battalion's earlier intelligence brief had warned of multiple overlapping firing positions, and now the crew expected the next attack to be sudden and severe. Palmer's radio came alive again, this time with urgent voices. "Enemy armor confirmed, near your sector. Unknown number. Keep front armor facing east." The transmission cut off before the voice could finish. Rourke lowered himself further into the hatch. "Everyone stay ready. Marsh, watch the right alley. That's the most likely approach." Marsh adjusted his sight. On it, Hanley maintained a slow advance, careful not to oversteer as the road narrowed between 2 large factory buildings. The walls on both sides rose several stories, creating a corridor with almost no lateral escape. It was the worst possible environment for a tank fight, but retreat was not an option. The infantry needed the jumbo to break through. Halfway through the corridor, the first sign of incoming armor appeared, not visually, but through sound. The heavy clatter of tracks echoed from the far end of the alley, followed by a low rumble. Marsh shifted his sight toward the opening ahead, but the angle was too tight to see clearly. "Can't get a clean view yet," he said. "Too much cover." Rourke straightened in the hatch. "Driver, hold us here. Loader, AP ready." Kovacs placed an armor-piercing round into the breech, checking the locking mechanism twice before stepping back. His breathing remained steady, but tension showed in the way he gripped the next round. Infantry began calling out positions, pointing deeper into the industrial complex. The echoes made it difficult to pinpoint the location, but the sound of armor became clearer. Several engines, not just one. Then the opening at the far into the corridor flashed with movement. A dark silhouette shifted behind a cloud of dust. Marsh leaned into his sight. "Tank, no two looks like Panzer IVs," he said. "They're trying to get a firing angle." Rourke immediately understood the danger. The jumbo's armor could withstand frontal hits, but in the narrow corridor, a flank shot could be devastating. Worse, the Germans had likely chosen this approach precisely to expose the jumbo's side. "Marsh, take the first one that shows more than a turret. Hanley, angle us, given the strongest plate." Hanley moved the tank slightly left, forcing the frontal armor to absorb any incoming fire. Marsh held his aim steady, waiting for the enemy tank to expose itself fully. The 1st Panzer IV inched forward, attempting to center its gun through the corridor. Its barrel emerged first, followed by the front plate. Marsh inhaled once and tightened his grip on the firing trigger. "On target," he said quietly. "Fire," Rourke ordered. The jumbo's AP round struck the Panzer IV squarely on the front hull. The German tank jerked backward from the impact and stalled in place. Smoke seeped through its driver's hatch, but its turret continued to turn, trying to bring its gun to bear. "Load AP," Rourke said immediately. Kovacs shoved another round into the breech. Marsh fired again. This time the shell penetrated the turret ring. The German crew attempted to abandon the vehicle. Stumbling out of the side, Hatch's infantry opened fire to suppress them. Before the jumbo could resume movement, a violent flash erupted from a side alley on the right. A massive blast struck the tank's front slope armor. A high-velocity 88mm round fired at close range. The sound was deafening. The tank rocked hard enough to slam Kovacs back into the ammunition rack. Marsh steadied himself with both hands against the sight assembly. Palmer instinctively ducked as dust and loose fragments rained down inside the hull. But the armor held. Rourke's voice cut through the ringing inside the tank. "Marsh, find that gun. It's close." Marsh adjusted the turret, scanning the narrow alley. The muzzle flash location was identifiable now, a concealed position behind a pile of collapsed steel beams. Another German crew had dragged an 88mm pack gun into the ruins. Before they could reload, Marsh saw the barrel shift. "They're preparing another shot," he said. "Need he?" Kovacs quickly switched ammunition. Marsh aimed between the beams and fired. The He round detonated against the debris, sending metal fragments and dust outward. The gun crew scrambled, trying to reposition. Infantry advanced immediately, throwing grenades into the remaining cover and silencing the position completely. Another rumble sounded from the main corridor. The 2nd Panzer IV was advancing, using the disabled 1st tank as partial cover. Marsh rotated the turret and brought the sight back onto the moving silhouette. "AP loaded," Kovacs said. "Take that tank now," Rourke commanded. Marsh fired. The round struck the Panzer IV's frontal plate but did not fully penetrate. The German tank lurched but kept pushing forward. Its turret began rotating toward the jumbo. Kovacs loaded another shell. Marsh fired again, hitting the enemy tank's lower glacis. This shot forced the Panzer IV to stop abruptly. Its turret halted mid-rotation. After a moment, smoke began rising from under the engine deck. The crew bailed out on foot, fleeing toward the far end of the alley. The infantry secured the bodies, ensuring no counterattack remained. Inside the jumbo, the crew took a moment to absorb the fight they had just survived. Their ears rang from the impacts. Kovacs rested with both hands on the shell rack, breathing through the tension. Marsh kept his eye on the sight, but relaxed his posture slightly. Hanley waited for further instructions, his hands still firmly gripping the controls. Palmer quietly checked the radio equipment for damage. Rourke surveyed the corridor ahead. The German armor resistance had been heavier than expected, and the 88mm gun had come dangerously close to breaching their defenses. Yet the jumbo had pushed through, carrying the infantry line with it. "Driver," Rourke said finally, "move us forward. We're breaking through this sector today." The tank advanced, its frontal armor dented and scorched but intact. The infantry formed up behind it again, and together, they pushed deeper into Stahlberg, toward the final strong points that still held the town. The final stretch toward Stahlberg Center brought the column into an area where the factories ended and the town's older stone buildings began again. The streets widened slightly, but the sightlines were still limited by collapsed roofs, walls leaning at dangerous angles, and piles of debris that turned the road into a narrow, winding path. German defenders had fallen back from the industrial district, but the resistance was far from broken. The infantry moved carefully, aware that retreating units often set up new defensive positions just a few blocks away. Inside the jumbo, the crew worked with the quiet focus that only emerged after hours of fighting. Marsh maintained his grip on the sight handles, scanning windows and alleyways as the tank advanced. Kovacs inspected the ammunition rack, mentally calculating how many AP and he rounds remained. Hanley kept the tank at a measured pace, avoiding loose rubble that could trap the tracks. Palmer monitored the radio, picking up fragments of communication from nearby platoons. The voices indicated heavy fighting in other sectors of the town. As they approached a wide intersection, the infantry signaled for the tank to hold. Rourke raised his head above the hatch, studying the surrounding buildings. A large three-story structure with boarded windows dominated the left side. Across from it stood a row of smaller houses, most with shattered door frames and broken shutters. The intersection itself was covered in dust and small craters, evidence of previous artillery fire. Marsh called out quietly, "Moving on the third floor, left side." Rourke lowered himself halfway into the hatch. "Can you identify it?" "Hard to say. Could be a spotter." The infantry prepared to cross the intersection, but before they moved, a sudden burst of rifle fire erupted from the right side buildings. The men scattered behind rubble for cover. A German machine gun opened up from an upper window, sweeping the street with harsh, controlled bursts. Rourke pointed. "Marsh, second window from the top, right building." "On it." "Load heat." Kovacs slid a high-explosive shell into the breach and stepped aside. Marsh fired. The round hit just below the window, blowing out a section of wall. The machine gun fire stopped instantly. Infantry advanced to secure the area. Before they could regroup, a deeper, unmistakable blast echoed from the far end of the street. It was not the sharp crack of an anti-tank round, nor the continuous chatter of machine gun fire. It was the low, powerful boom of a heavier weapon being fired through narrow urban streets. Palmer listened through the radio headset. Another unit reports a self-propelled gun operating near the town square. Could be an armored vehicle or a fixed gun. Rourke adjusted his position in the hatch. "Marsh, front arc, watch the street ahead." "Hanley, move us forward another 10 yards." The jumbo advanced, pushing aside loose bricks with its reinforced hull. The infantry followed closely, staying within the tank's protective shadow. The buildings ahead opened slightly into a wider avenue leading toward Stahlberg's municipal buildings. Smoke drifted across the road, thick enough to obscure anything more than 20 meters away. The next blast came from somewhere inside the smoke. It hit the street just in front of the jumbo, throwing dust upward and sending fragments of stone across the hull. Marsh steadied the gun. Indirect fire. Could be a stooge. They like to sit low. Rourke scanned the obscured avenue. "We need visual confirmation." "Hanley, push forward slowly." "Marsh, be ready on AP." Kovacs prepared another armor-piercing round. The infantry tightened their formation, watching both flanks for hidden threats. As the jumbo moved into the open area, a dark shape materialized through the smoke. A low-profile silhouette, broad hull, and distinct sloped armor plates. It moved slightly, trying to reposition behind fallen masonry. "It's a Stooge 3, Marsh said. "Front left." Rourke responded instantly. "Marsh, take the shot once you have a clean view." Hanley angled the hull to maximize frontal protection. Marsh tracked the Stooge's movement closely, waiting for the moment when its gun barrel cleared the debris. The German vehicle fired first. The round struck the jumbo's upper hull, denting the weld seam but failing to penetrate. The impact shook the entire tank. Kovacs steadied himself against the ammunition rack. Marsh returned fire without hesitation. His AP round hit the Stooge's upper front plate and diverted slightly, leaving a large gouge. The German vehicle reversed, trying to take cover behind a collapsed wall. Another round, Rourke ordered. Kovacs loaded quickly. Marsh aimed at the exposed right edge of the vehicle where the armor was weaker. Firing. The shell penetrated. A burst of smoke shot upward from the Stoogee's rear deck. After a moment, the crew abandoned the vehicle, disappearing into the side alleys. Infantry secured the area, confirming that the assault gun was no longer operational. The jumbo pushed forward, its armor now marked by fresh dents from the Stoogee's attack. The infantry reorganized, preparing for what they believed would be the final stretch toward the town center. The resistance had not collapsed entirely, but it was weakening under the steady combined pressure of the armor and infantry. As the tank advanced into the next block, the buildings became more spaced, suggesting they were approaching the central administrative zone. The smoke thinned, and daylight filtered through the shattered rooftops. Rourke scanned the horizon, noting the outlines of several prominent structures that matched the map briefing. Palmer received a new transmission. Other units are reporting German withdrawal from several sectors. They're falling back to secondary positions. We may be close to breaking their line. Rourke nodded, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. Stay focused. They'll cover their retreat with whatever guns they have left. The tank rolled steadily toward the town square. The crew remained alert, the infantry close behind. They had survived multiple anti-tank guns, Panzer IVs, small arms ambushes, and a Stooge-3. The jumbo's reinforced armor had endured every direct hit so far, allowing the battalion to push deeper than earlier attempts. As the sound of battle shifted further into the distance, the realization settled in that Stahlberg's defenses were finally beginning to fracture. The road ahead remained dangerous, but the momentum had shifted. Rourke lowered himself fully into the turret and spoke through the intercom in a calm, controlled voice. "Let's finish this." The jumbo advanced toward the final strong points of Stahlberg, leading the way with the confidence earned from surviving everything thrown at it since entering the town.